The concern surrounding the coming war with Iraq is that while almost everyone agrees that Saddam Hussein is a brutal dictator, many people doubt that he poses an immediate threat to Britain, or that he's linked to the people who attacked America on September the 11th, 2001. So, are we going to war to satisfy the need for American revenge and on America's timetable? Tricia Bingley and Alec Clark, you both lost children in the attack on the World Trade Center. You'd have thought that you would support a war against Iraq.
I could support, possibly, a war against Iraq with a second resolution. And I agree with you. There has been an enormous amount of aggression coming out from the USA post-September the 11th. And what really, really bothers me is that it is demonizing Muslims around the world, and that moderate Muslims, good moderate Muslims in all sorts of countries are being driven to Islamic fundamentalism. And this is going to be a problem that will go on and on and on.
Mr. What do you say to that?
Well, I think that's a perfectly reasonable point. There are points there that I would agree with. I mean, I'll just point out that I was talking a moment ago about the other two conflicts I was involved in. One was in Kosovo, where we went to save Kosovo Muslims against a Serb Orthodox Christian regime. And I think it's important to realize we may be right, we may be wrong in the action against Saddam, but it's not because Iraq is a Muslim country. I would like to suggest to you that I think, however, there are two real problems that we have at the moment. One, I think that for the Arab and Muslim world, easily the biggest issue for them is the Middle East peace process. And if we were able to restart that and gain some momentum in that, I think that would take a lot of this poison in the atmosphere between the Arab-Muslim world on the one hand and the West on the other. And the second is that I just think we need greater understanding between the religious faiths and greater dialogue, because in fact what these extremists are doing is a complete perversion of the true faith of Islam. And one of the things I hope that we don't lose sight of, whatever happens in relation to Iraq, is the need to push forward on both those points. Otherwise, I agree, there is a risk of what you say happening, and I'm trying to work against it.
Well, let's hear from Tricia Bingley. You also lost a child in the World Trade Center.
I lost my only child in the World Trade Center. Now, for the last 18 months, my pain has been unbearable. I can't describe to you how I feel and how I will feel to the rest of my life. Now, as far as I'm concerned, Iraq, there was no link between Iraq and the attack of the World Trade Center. And I also say to you that I just can't imagine other mothers going through what I have gone through. And I wouldn't wish it on other mothers in Iraq, the mothers of the soldiers that are going out to war, when there's no justification for this war at this moment in time. Let the inspectors go in. And as far as I'm concerned, Mr. Blair, you're attacking Iraq with George Bush, and it's not dissimilar to what Bin Laden or the Al-Qaeda network done to America. They killed 3,000 or more innocent victims. How many innocent victims are you going to kill, and how many people is going to suffer like I've suffered?
But on the
No, Mr. Blair, don't do it.
Well, when we took action in respect of Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, whenever you take military action, it is true that innocent people die as well as guilty ones, but sometimes you have to take that action if it's the only way of dealing with the threat that is there. Look, I know what I say, I'm not going to convince you on it, but let me just tell you what my fear is. My fear is that if we allow Iraq to carry on developing these weapons, if we have terrorist groups that as you will know better than anyone here, are prepared to kill, they would have killed 30,000. They would have killed 300,000
But the point
if they
is,
could.
Prime Minister,
Let me just finish this. If we allow these groups to get hold of these types of weapons, then how many people will die? Now that's my worry. I don't have a monopoly of wisdom on this at all. I simply have a judgment which I'm trying to make on the basis of the weapons that these countries like Iraq have, and the desire of these terrorists to do the maximum damage to everything we stand for, our way of life and innocent people.
But don't you think it's going to exacerbate the extremist terrorists? You're giving them the perfect excuse to use whatever weapons they've got, not just in Iraq, but all the other extreme groups.
Well, I think that's a very good point, and let me try and deal with it. Look, I don't believe, I'm afraid, that we will stop being a target for these people if we lay off Iraq or lay off Afghanistan. The fact is, you know, America didn't attack Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda attacked America. The people, in respect of Bali, for example, Indonesia isn't known as a country anything to do with the front line of the fight against terrorism. The people that died in Kenya, the people that are dying in these terrorist attacks all over the world at the present time, these are not people who have sought to attack the terrorists have attacked them. And therefore, what I would say to you is I think it depends crucially on two things, actually. First of all, that it is shown, which is why we're not at war today, we're still trying to avoid it through the United Nations, that we show that we've done everything we can to get Saddam to do it voluntarily. And the second thing is, I think there will be a huge responsibility on us if we do undertake conflict to make sure that in the post-conflict situation in Iraq, it is done in a way that protects the Iraqi people, that allows us to lift sanctions from them, that allows us to make sure that their living standards are improved.
Going to attack around the world anyway, so we're going to go in and kill some more people.
This question about the link with Al-Qaeda, the problem is there is no smoking gun, is there? There is no link. And you've said quite frequently that there are things that you know which we don't. Why don't you share it with us this evening then?
Well, I haven't said there are things
where
that,
is the link?
I haven't said
where is the smoking gun?
I haven't said there are things that I know that you don't. And I've also very specifically said I've never suggested that Iraq was responsible in some way for September the 11th. What I've said is exactly what I've just said now. That the danger is if you have states that are proliferating or trading or dealing in these weapons, and I just tell you there are more and more states doing so, then at some point, at some point in time, the two threats will come together of terrorism and weapons of mass destruction. Now, the reason for dealing with Iraq is that we've had 12 years of trying to get them to come into United Nations compliance. If we then have to turn around and deal with other countries, we will never be able to deal with them peacefully and diplomatically unless we've made it clear that we are prepared to enforce our will. And therefore, Iraq, if it disarms voluntarily, fine. If Saddam came into compliance with the United Nations resolutions, that would be an end of the matter.
But you see, Prime Minister, the point is this, if I may just make this point, the point is this, every time we listen to Hans Blakes, he says, what we're destroying here are not toothpicks, we're destroying real weapons. Give us more time. And he says, it's not going to take years, it's not going to take weeks, but it could be done in months. Why not give him more time?
And what we say to that, and we say to him and he accepts, is that unless they are fully cooperating, and they're not yet, and no one believes that they are yet,
but the inspector says that they are. They say the level of cooperation is getting better. Just give them more time.
It is beyond doubt that since the troops have gone down there, the cooperation has gone up. Now, I don't think that's very surprising. It's what's happened in the last 12 years. Every time there's a threat of military action, there's some more cooperation. What we need to do, and this is what we're working on at the moment, and in fact, I spoke to Dr. Blix just a short time ago before I came here. What we're working on at the moment is trying to ensure that we make it clear what we're saying by full cooperation. Because the truth is, unless he comes into full cooperation, there is no way these inspectors can find this stuff in some sort of, you know, hide-and-seek game. They've got to have the full cooperation of Iraq.
Let's hear from Nicola Cumberledge.
Yeah, I still don't understand what your main reason is for wanting to attack Iraq. Because I just think that the sort of messages that are out there in the media are just confusing people, and perhaps they're out there deliberately to confuse people. Are you attacking Iraq because, you know, you're sort of following Bush and he wants revenge for September the 11th, and you can justify supporting him by saying, well, we've had weapons inspectors, you know, and they're sort of developing weapons, or they've got weapons of mass destruction, and you can use that as a sort of scapegoat for supporting WW as such. It's just not clear.
Okay. I mean,
everything's just chucked about.
I can understand that I'm not going to convince you.
And why now?
The very clear reason why now and why Iraq is this. For 12 years we've been trying to get into disarm.
So why didn't you go in 5 years ago?
Because we were at that time trying to make the sanctions regime
But
work.
I don't believe that. I think it's because George Bush has instigated this because of revenge for September the 11th.
Well,
you could have gone in there 3 years ago when Clinton was in power, but you didn't.
It's correct.
You haven't instigated it. He has, and you're following.
Well, can I just answer the point? Up until the end of 1998, we had the weapons inspectors in there. And it was a tale, I'm afraid, of 7 years of being messed about and not being able to do their job properly. Finally, because all the international pressure came off, Saddam said, you're not allowed to go to these sites and these sites and these sites, and the weapons inspectors left. We then... Yeah, they withdrew because they couldn't do their job. I mean,
They
look,
weren't thrown out.
Why didn't you go in then? Why didn't you sort of say we want
because
to go and attack
what we then
Iraq?
tried to do was to tighten up the sanctions rate. Because we have been reluctant to take action, we then tried to tighten up the
If
sanctions
you're
rate.
reluctant to take action,
Sorry, let me
why are
just-
you doing it in 10 days' time? If you're reluctant to take
I know,
action,
will you just
give
let
them
me,
longer.
because otherwise
Yeah.
I can't
Yeah.
finish the point I'm making.
If I could just clarify the point, Prime Minister. I mean, you've now given Saddam Hussein 10 days to disarm. If he does...
No, sorry, we haven't. You see, we have not given him 10 days to disarm. We've given him 10 days to show that he intends fully to cooperate with the inspectors.
Okay, 10 days
I'm not
to show
saying he can disarm everything in 10 days.
Okay.
As Jack Straw said at the Security Council, that would obviously be wrong to say that. What we are saying is, within the next period of time, he should be able to show definitively that he intends fully to cooperate. If he doesn't fully cooperate...
And if he
with the
does that, can he stay?
Sorry, if
If he does that, can he stay?
Of course, we've always made clear, abhorrent though the regime is, and though I think it would be a general act of goodness to get rid of this regime, we've got to work within the terms of the UN resolution, and the purpose of that is disarmament.
So he can stay?
If he does what the UN want him to do, it's always been the case that he can stay.
Is the deadline... May I just... Sorry, can I just ask the Prime Minister one question on this? Is the deadline then still next Monday, or could that change?
Well, we're in discussion with other countries now. We've laid it down because we believe that gives enough time for him to show that he's fully cooperating. But the very reason why we're negotiating and talking to people is to try and find a way through that brings the UN together. But it's got to be a way through that allows us to uphold the integrity of the resolution we passed in the United Nations last November, when 4 months ago we said, this is it, this is your final opportunity. And we said he had to comply fully, unconditionally, and immediately, and he's not complying fully or unconditionally or immediately.
I'd just like to ask one question.
Yeah.
They've been in there for 6 months, right? Why can't we give them more time? Is the life of a British soldier, is the life of an Iraqi innocent child not worth a few more months?
Well, the answer to that is we can give them as much time as they want, provided Iraq demonstrates that it's cooperating fully. Because if we give them as much time as they want, but Saddam is not cooperating, we will be back where we were for 7 years in the 1990s, getting a concession here and a concession there, but actually nothing really happening. That's the worry.
Can I just say that there were two coups to overthrow Saddam, one in 91 and one in 96. And what Saddam did is use the no-fly zones, which were imposed by the West, to actually crush that opposition. Is there no other way of dealing with Saddam? I think we have to separate Saddam as a dictator and the innocent people of Iraq.
Yeah.
I don't see how you're opting for the moral high ground, saying now we want to liberate the people of Iraq by bombing them. I don't see how you're liberating them.
Well, first of all, of course, there's a clear distinction between Saddam and the Iraqi people, which is why in any conflict that we undertake, it's important that we target the military infrastructure around him, not innocent Iraqi people. But secondly, I mean, those two attempts to overthrow Saddam, which took place in 1991 and 1996, I think it's correct in the sense that Iraqi people were left in those circumstances to fend for themselves. I think it's important that that does not happen again, and it won't on this occasion.
I'm just talking on behalf of majority of people. They hate Saddam. They hate this regime. We are hating it more than you do, but we do not want war. We would like to have some other peaceful resolution. And I feel that British public has been blind and has been in the backstage, not knowing what other solution could be done to resolve this particular problem, not necessarily going with all this power onto war. Why can't you do other things, other resolution, peaceful one, to get rid of Saddam? This is first. And second, you are saying you are not sure about the casualties which are going to be. 300,000 bombs going to be thrown on Iraqi people in 48 hours. How much exactly casualty we're going to have there?
Let the Prime Minister answer,
First
please.
of all, I don't know where you get 300,000. I mean, 300,000 bombs in 48
It
hours.
was in The Guardian on the TV.
I can assure you, I am not planning on dropping 300,000 bombs on any Iraqi people. So let's just, and some of the stories there are in the press about what we intend to do in this campaign, well, I'll just, beyond anything, I can assure you we are contemplating. If we go into conflict, we will be targeting the military infrastructure of Saddam specifically, because it's removing him that will be the aim of this. The point that you make, however, is totally reasonable. Of course, it would be good if there was another way of removing Saddam. But as you know better than me, the fact is he was prepared to use chemical weapons on his own people. He kills literally thousands of them every year.
Mr. Blair, he is ready to use chemical weapons again now to sacrifice all Iraqi people for his own power. He will do anything to stay in the power, and you know that very well.
Yeah, but if
you go for war with him, he will use these chemical weapons on his own people. He will destroy all Iraq to stay in the power.
Yeah, but isn't that an indication that he is that evil? Isn't that a reason why it's important that he is disarmed of these weapons?
We'll take a break now. When we come back, we'll be asking the Prime Minister why he's given such unswerving support to the American president. Is he George Bush's poodle? Welcome back. Ever since the outrage of September 11th, Tony Blair has given staunch support to President Bush in the war against terror. But now there's considerable doubt about whether the war against Iraq is in Britain's interest. So much so that the Prime Minister has been referred to as George Bush's poodle. Prime Minister, that's not very pleasant, isn't it? What do you say to that?
I think you get used to being called all sorts of things in politics, some worse than poodle, actually.
But the point is that this is, frankly, not a war of our making, really. No. This is not our war, is it? This is America's war.
No, it's the whole of the international community's challenge, right, to decide whether we meant what we said last November. Look, I'm the person who took this back through the United Nations. When people wanted to go to war last summer, I said, no, you've got to give the UN and the international community a chance to work on this. It came together and it said certain things. It said, 1, he is a threat. 2, he's got to be disarmed. 3, this is his final opportunity to do it.
Would we have done it on our own then?
Well, we didn't do it on our own. We did it with the UN. Now, either we meant what we said last November, in which case we have to follow it through, or fine, we didn't mean what we say. But I did.
Let's hear from Jane Bennett here. So I'll come back to you.
Yes, well, you say we're doing it with the Americans. My husband's American, so we have lots of family and friends in America, and not one of them is with Bush on this, just like we feel that the British public aren't behind you. So I think it's completely unrepresentative to say that we are doing it with America. It seems that Bush and you, Mr. Blair, are doing it.
Well, I don't think actually I said we're doing it with America. I mean, we will do what is necessary to do because we passed that UN resolution last year, and it's not a question of doing it because it's America, although I should say to you, I am proud of the relationship we have with America, and I think it's an important relationship for this country, and I think it would be very unwise if we cast it aside. But that's not the reason I'm doing it. The reason I'm doing it is that I think it's right for us and for the international community to take a stand on this issue now, because if we don't take a stand now, we will find that the next challenge in this area that we meet will be far more difficult to meet. And if there's one thing surely we have learned as a country in our history, is if you don't face up to these things first time round, you have to return to them later, usually in far worse and more bloody circumstances.
Let's hear from Helen Sam.
My question is, when you joined the Labour Party, did you think that you'd end up sending B-52s over to Iraq? Did you think that you'd cause the biggest demonstrations against your policy ever to have been seen in the world? You're going to see millions on the streets the Saturday after you start bombing Iraq. You're probably going to split your own party. And you're spending billions on this war. And I'm from NUS. And you've said since 1997 that there's no money for education, there's no money for decent hospitals, but there's a bottomless pit when it comes to war. Is this what a Labour Party Prime Minister should be doing?
We are spending a very great deal of money on education and health, far more in 1 year on the National Health Service than the whole of the war would cost. So, I mean, let's get it in perspective and be reasonable with each other. Look, no, of course I don't want to be in a situation where either the Labour Party is divided or the country's divided. But we have an issue and we have to resolve it. And what I'm trying to say to you, and as I say, I mean, I'm aware, in fact, I won't convince you, but I'm trying to say to you, however strongly you feel about your position, it is sometimes necessary, I'm afraid, to say things that people don't want to hear as well as things that people do. And you know, we have seen in this country, for example, over the past few months, we've had, not just in this country, right around the rest of Europe, arresting these terrorist groups who are already trying to use chemical and biological means to get across the damage that they want to do to people. I simply say to you, and this is my honest assessment, if we don't deal with this issue now, if we allow Iraq to carry on developing these weapons, and then other countries will get the message that they can do it too, there will come a point in time when these two threats come together, and the devastation in the world then will be immense, and people will then look back and they'll ask people like me, why, when you saw the threat and acknowledged it, did you do nothing?
Prime Minister, let's look at the critical issue of a second UN resolution. According to a poll, and this time it's a poll of men and women, support for the war would increase to 71% if you did get that second resolution. Without it, it falls to about 22%. You desperately need that second resolution. You desperately need those votes, don't you?
I want to do it, yes, through the UN. And I want to do it not just for political reasons, actually, but because I think the authority of the UN's at stake.
What's the sort of going rate for a vote in the Security Council these days? How much are people paying?
Well,
how much are people being offered?
You know, you say, all I can say to you is I've had conversations with all the leaders on the Security Council, and I've not been talking to them about money or financial packages. The idea that somehow this has been done by sort of bribery and all the rest of it, it isn't. I'm afraid in the end, it's a question of working out where people want to stand on this. And I'm doing my level best to persuade them that the UN, having said that Saddam must disarm, should carry through its mandate. Now, you can believe all the conspiracy theories that you like. It's like the stuff about all this is to do with oil and everything. People can believe it if they want to believe it. It isn't true.
Mr. Blair, if we don't get the second resolution, and I know you're working extremely hard, you've been telling us you've been working on the phone over the weekend and even today about it. If we don't get the second resolution and we're in tow to America, are we going to go to war without it? We've already heard your Cabinet Minister, Claire Short, saying that she will not support you. The vast majority of the country will not support you without that second resolution. If we don't get that second resolution, are we still going to go to war? That's my question.
First of all, we're not going to do anything in tow to America. Secondly, I've said all the way throughout, before we have the vote on the resolution, it's not very sensible to start speculating on what's going to happen if, and what if this happens and what if that happens. I'm working flat out to get it. You know, as I sit here now, I'm still confident that we can get it. I think that people do understand Saddam has got to disarm voluntarily, otherwise force has got to be used. And I think what people are asking us to do is to define more precisely for them what it is that would allow us to say, yes, he is cooperating, or no, he's not. Now, that is a reasonable thing that they're saying to us, and we're working on that now.
Aren't we entitled to know whether you will go to war if, I mean, I know you're trying to get a second resolution, but if you don't, aren't we entitled to know whether you will still go to war? Aren't people entitled to know that?
Well, I've set out the circumstances and talked about.
But you wouldn't say whether you will or will not.
Well, I don't think at the very moment when we're negotiating this, it's very sensible to speculate on that.
So you can't give us a guarantee that if you don't get those 9 votes, you wouldn't go to war?
I'm not going into the business of guarantees this way or guarantees that way. What I'm saying to you is we're working flat out for the second resolution, and I'm not, by speculating on it, going to do anything that endangers our possibility of getting it. But if you want to know, I think there are countries moving our way, and I think the outstanding issue for many countries is that they want to know what it is we mean by saying he fully cooperates or he doesn't.
Sorry, how are you going to measure that?
Well, that's the very thing that we're working on. Because, I mean, let me just give you one example. One example would be, in the resolution 1441, we provided for the ability to take witnesses out of the country. So far, he's refused to let any of the witnesses leave the country. Now, that would be some demonstration. See, so it's things like that.
I think he needs more time. I think Hans Blix needs more time. He's asking for months, Prime Minister. He's not asking for years.
Let's hear from Charlotte Jones.
The second resolution, as far as I'm concerned, this war will still not be legitimate, even if you get a second resolution. I wish you would spend more time on negotiation. I admired your policy, and still admire your policy, on Northern Ireland. I think that is the way to deal with terrorism. Terrorists need to be talked with, listened to. Terrorists are appalling. We all agree with that. There's no letting them off the hook. But you've done this with Northern Ireland. It was brilliant. It's fantastic. It needs to be done here. We have a huge problem now, this massive polarization of the Muslim world and the Western world, and we're sitting here in the middle of it as ordinary people of this country in terror. I'm so afraid of this racism. I'm so afraid of this demonizing of these people. I desperately want you to sit down and talk to them like you talk to the IRA and begin to hear them and begin to understand the causes of terrorism.
In respect to Northern Ireland, I mean, I think that is an interesting point because it's the difference. You've got 2 interesting parallels out of Northern Ireland. The first is you had a group of people there with whom you could negotiate. There is no negotiation possible with the al-Qaeda terrorists. I mean, their demand is that every state turns itself into a Taliban.
Are we talking about
fundamentalist state.
You rescued a situation. Everybody, I mean, you know, I've been alive 38 years, and I remember all through the 70s, I was going, oh no, you can't possibly negotiate with Northern Ireland. Hopeless, unresolvable. You started a resolution. You said we can negotiate where everyone said you couldn't.
And you've
this
got to
is
make
an
it
opportunity for you to make a statesman-like act. I'm looking to you for that. I voted for you as well, twice. I won't again unless you start to make moves in a statesman-like way, like the French, like the Russian, like Nelson Mandela.
If I think there is a negotiated way through, I'll take it. And that's the reason why I put the inspectors back into Iraq.
Okay?
Keep trying, though. Please keep trying.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to take a break now, but when we come back, we'll be asking the Prime Minister about the consequences of war. Necessary action or dangerous folly?
Any Iraqi deaths being acceptable, you try and limit civilian casualties as much as you can. And I have absolutely no intention of undertaking action that's going to kill thousands of innocent Iraqis.
But you've had discussions with American generals and so on. You've had discussion with politicians in America. I mean, when this thing is talked about, does anybody speculate about how many people might die? Not because you purposely set out to kill them, but how many might die? What, 5,000?
No, what you do is you make sure that the targets that you select are the military targets, and that's exactly what we're trying to do.
But nobody talked about civilian casualties for 5,000?
No, you talk about how you limit civilian casualties as much as possible.
So we'll limit it to what, 5, 10,
no,
15?
Look, you go into it with the aim of ensuring that there are as few civilian casualties as possible. It is true that in any conflict, I'm afraid, innocent people do die. That happened when we went to war in Kosovo, that happened when we went to war in Afghanistan, although it was a lot less than people said and thought might happen.
But is there
and we will do
price
everything we can. No, of course, there's no acceptable price.
But is there ever a price which is too high to pay in civilian lives? Is there ever a price which is too high to pay in civilian lives?
Well, what you do is you try to make sure that the military action that you undertake minimizes the potential for civilian casualties, which is why in the planning that we're doing, we're trying to make sure that we target the military infrastructure and the things that keep the Saddam regime propped up rather than the Iraqi people. And, you know, look, we had exactly these debates when we undertook the action in Afghanistan, and people were accusing us of sort of carpet bombing Afghanistan. We didn't do anything of the sort. We targeted as much as possible on the military infrastructure of the Taliban. We would do exactly the same in relation to the Iraqi regime, if we get to that stage.
Let's hear from Hannibeth Luke, who has some experience of terrorism because her boyfriend was killed in Indonesia.
Yes, Mr. Blair, I've come from Australia to show you this photograph of Mark Cajardo and myself. This photo was taken on the 11th of October last year, the night before the Bali bomb. We were both in the Sari Club. Mark was killed and I've made it out, but I saw the carnage. I've seen the devastation and I've seen the suffering that results. I've seen all this. I've seen the suffering that results with families in Australia and in England. I heard the thud of Mark's father's knees as he fell to the floor when I told him over the phone his son was dead. This is the consequence of one bombing in Bali. Do you really want to support Bush and go into this war with Iraq and subject so many more innocent Iraqi families, regardless of how accurate your bombs are? They will be hurt, they will be, and they will go through the same pain that I've seen. Do you really believe this is justified? And I also believe they're going to become more desperate and therefore they are going to resort to more terrorism. Do you not believe this is going to be a consequence of the war on Iraq? More innocent young men like Mark will be targeted. Will be killed.
There's nothing I can say to take away the pain that you feel in this situation.
But I'm not asking you to take my pain away.
I know, but I'm just saying that right at the outset. But the reason why I'm taking this action is that my worry is if the terrorists are able to get hold of even worse material than they used in the bomb in Bali, you could be talking not about several hundred people dying, but several thousand people dying, perhaps even more than that. And that's why I'm doing it. Look, who would want to be in the position of going to war? But if I actually believe and genuinely believe that there is a real risk, because we know these terrorist groups, the sort that perpetrated that atrocity in Bali, are trying to get hold of these weapons. If we don't take action against this threat now, the risk is not that innocent people die simply, but that they die on a huge scale. And that's what worries me. Now, there are no easy choices in this situation, and there is no, moral high ground that one side owns and the other side doesn't. But that's what I see every single day across my desk. I get reports of these terrorist groups, the sorts that are in Europe at the moment, the sorts that did that in Bali, although Bali got nothing to do with the war against terror.
Until we start asking these people why they hate us so much, we are not going to find out the causes of why this is occurring. These people are not using weapons of mass destruction. They are using weapons that are at their hands easily. They use planes to fly into the World Trade Center. They use fertilizer in Bali. These people are using their minds, not weapons of mass destruction.
Well, but if they could... Yeah, but surely, you know, let's at least agree on one thing. If they could use a weapon of mass destruction, they would.
Okay, Trisha Bingley, you had your hand up.
Isn't there... There's other dangerous, very dangerous countries in this world at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Certainly true.
You know, the threat is much fiercer for us. And your top priority at this moment, if I may say so, Mr. Blair, is because you've brought it out that it's not if we are going to be attacked, but we are going to be attacked. When are we going to be attacked? And remember, in America, those terrorists lived, and they planned it all in America, and they used the American planes to kill. It wasn't missiles, it wasn't, you know, and it's up to you, I think, to really make this your top. Iraq is being done by the inspection, and they're going in and they're keeping up, and I'm sure you and America with their planes are keeping their eye on Saddam and seeing just what he's at. And I don't believe for 1 minute he's going to get whatever things he's hidden there out to the terrorists while you are inspections are going, and that is not killing anybody. It's not killing anybody.
Please let the Prime Minister.
Just one more point, Mr. Blair. You are a man that has come across in our country, and I know I've spoken to lots of women who, you know, when you came into power and you spoke on the television and the media, they said, this man, he comes across as a genuine man, a family-orientated man. A man is not only a Christian, but a church-going Christian. Now, to me, Mr. Blair, what you're going to do, and I'm sure you're going to do it, you and Mr. Bush, you're going to go and now bomb Iraq. You don't know how many people like me that's going to suffer so much. My
Should we
life
let the
is
Prime Minister
finished.
answer that now, please?
Well, I'm doing it because I think it's the right thing to do, and I hope even at this stage we can avoid conflict, actually. I still think it's possible that we can, although I do think our chances of avoiding it are reduced if we show him any sign of weakness. And look, in the end, you've got to decide. I mean, you know, we are in a democracy. People can believe what they want to believe. But the reason I am pursuing such a tough line in Iraq is that I genuinely think there is a danger here. And you began your question by saying that there are other countries that are a threat too. There are. But none of those other countries will take the international community seriously if we deal with Iraq after 12 years of trying to deal with them in a weak way.
I'm sorry, Prime Minister, just a couple of final points. What sort of deal are you working on to try and secure the passage of this second resolution?
We're talking to all the other countries about how we ensure that we can make a proper judgment as to whether Saddam is fully cooperating or not. I mean, it is a matter of consensus, I think, that he has to be disarmed, that he poses a threat, that he has to cooperate fully and immediately, and we know he's not doing that at the moment. And what we're talking about with other countries is, well, how do we define that for people properly so that the international community can make a sensible and proper judgment? Because I think that is the area where, at the moment, there are difficulties between countries.
Regardless of what happens in this war, Prime Minister, some of your colleagues at Westminster are talking not about regime change in Baghdad, but about regime change at Westminster.
Well, these are all questions that people can speculate on. What I'm trying to do is do what I believe is right for the country. And as I've said to people here who don't agree with me, and you know, one of the reasons I'm doing programs all over the news media and all over the country with people who don't agree with me is because I want at least to have a dialogue. And even if we don't agree, you can at least understand why I'm saying what I'm saying, and I understand what you're saying and the reasons for it.
But if this goes badly, you're finished, really, aren't you?
Well, let's wait and see, Trevor, shall we, about that, as to whether it goes badly, because I don't intend it to go badly. I'm working to get the second UN resolution. But
if it does, I mean, you must think that, you know, in the sort of dark hours before the morning, if it does go badly,
let's get the job done, which we're trying to do, which is the disarmament of Iraq, hopefully by peaceful means. But if not, we have to make sure that the will of the UN is enforced.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As we ended, 5 out of the 18 members of our panel showed their displeasure by slow hand-clapping the Prime Minister. But what did the others think?
I think Mr. Blair is a very clever politician. I think if I spent 24 hours feeding him different questions, he'd come out with the same answers each and every time.
Even without a second resolution, they're going for it.
Having met the Prime Minister today, I now have the impression that he has already made his mind up.